little boy named Timmy was getting ready for bed. His mom came to his room to pray with him before he went to sleep. As they were praying, his dad and his grandma were down in the living room. Little Timmy started praying to God and asking Him for basically giving him his Christmas list. Jesus, I want a new basketball. And I want a new pair of pants. Little Timmy apparently was a weird kid. And all of a sudden he shouts out, "And I want a new bicycle!" His mom said, "Tim, you don't have to shout. God's not deaf." He said, "I know, but Grandma is." If you will, let's turn in our Bibles to Luke chapter 2. This past Sunday we talked about Mary and the plans that she had. This Sunday we're looking at Luke chapter 2. We're going to read verses 8 and 9. Luke 2, verses 8 and 9. If you will, read that aloud with me. "And there were in the same country shepherds abiding in the field, keeping watch over their flock by night. And lo, the angel of the Lord came upon them, and the glory of the Lord shone round about them, and they were sore afraid." I've often wondered why the first people that found out, or the first people that showed up at the manger, were shepherds. Why they were the first ones that were told about it. I think I've come up with a few things that kind of explain, or at least to me, why the shepherds were chosen as the first ones to come. We look and we see at the very end of that section of Scripture that it says, "And they were sore afraid." I think that the shepherds were used first of all because they were humble. I think it's because they were humble. We look through the Bible, we look through the life of Jesus, at the Jews, at the Pharisees especially, and we see that the people that were highest on the hierarchy of their social standing tended to look down upon Jesus. They didn't see Him in high regard. He was a homeless person, wandering around, didn't have a place to stay, didn't have anything of His own, claiming that He's the Messiah, doing all of these wonderful miracles in front of the Pharisees. And we see that in their lofty positions, they couldn't lower themselves to believe that this was the Messiah. They weren't humble. Could you imagine what would have happened if angels appeared before a bunch of people like that, saying, "I want you to go to this tiny little town. I want you to go to a barn. I want you to go look in the trough. You're going to find the Son of God there." They would have thought that they were hallucinating, that they had had too much to drink, someone had slipped them something. They couldn't believe, they wouldn't have been able to believe, that the Son of God would come to a place like that. So I think that the reason that God chose the shepherds to use first was first of all because they were humble. You have a bunch of people aren't educated out in the plains and the hills watching over sheep. They don't have any expectations of anything great. They don't think anything great about themselves. They do their job, they make their money, they take care of their business, and that's it. And all of a sudden the sky parts and out comes a host of angels telling them that the Messiah has come, the Son of God is being born, and they can find him lying in a manger. They were humble enough to believe it. They were humble enough to accept it. They didn't think that their Messiah had to come in some special way. He just had to come. And that's all that they cared about. I think that the shepherds were also used because they were handy. At the beginning of verse 8 it says, "They were in the same country, shepherds abiding in the field." They were in the same country. They were already there. They didn't have to make a long trip. We look at the story of the 3 wise men. They had a far distance to have to travel. They didn't show up until Jesus was already a few years old. I know that messes up our manger scenes that we put out. But they didn't show up until he was already a few years old. They had a long distance to travel. But the shepherds were in the same country, in the same land, watching over their flocks at night. They were there. And they were willing to go. That's another thing that made them handy. Not only were they in the same area, but it didn't take a whole lot of persuading to get them to pack up and go. They were told the Messiah is in this barn. Go see him. They said, all right, let's do that. And they went. They were willing. The third reason that I think that the angels, that God chose the shepherds to use, was that he knew that they would be hasty. In verse 15, after the angels have sung and done their thing, the shepherds say, let us now go. They don't say, let us wait. Let's go tell some people where we're going so they know where we're at. They say, let us now go. Let us pick up, let's get this stuff together, let's go. We've got to get there. I kind of wonder how we would have done in that situation. How many of us would have just dropped what we were doing right then and there and say, you know what, this can wait. An angel just split the sky wide open, and a bunch of them came with it and told me that the Messiah is born in a barn. Some of us might would have dropped everything just because we like to see things that are weird or new, different. But I think that some of us would have had to say, well, he'll be there in a couple hours. I can finish this up real quick and I'll be on over. That's not what the shepherds did. They didn't wait around. They wanted to be there. So they packed up and went. Looking at these 3 things, it gives us lessons for our lives that we can learn from these lowly shepherds. First of all, it's that for God to be able to use us, for us to be able to live a godly life, we have to be humble. We have to admit that we don't have all of the answers. It's hard to accept God when you think that you are God. When you think you have all of the answers, it's hard to look for them. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons that we can learn from these shepherds. lot of times we wonder why we're not growing closer to God. And maybe this is where it comes in at. Maybe this is why it happens. Maybe we don't grow closer to God because in our minds, there's nothing left for us to learn from Him. Now, we may not admit that. We may not say it out loud. But deep down inside, we may have that little voice that says, you can't learn anything from this person. You don't need to keep reading these scriptures over and over. How many times have you read the Bible? How many times have you read this book, this chapter, these verses? So we don't take it quite as seriously. We've been there before. We've done that. No big deal. For us to draw closer to God, the most important thing for us to be is humble. Knowing and acknowledging that we don't have the answers and we need His help and His guidance. We also can learn from the shepherds that God can use us best if we are handy. If we're willing to go. The shepherds didn't need anything special to be able to go and visit the manger scene. They just needed a chance to serve God. And they took it. They didn't wait around for something better or something bigger. They took that chance right where they were. You know, it's easy to tell who a true missionary is. A lot of times we go to missionary services, especially at Pell City. They have a missionary service every year. And if they are sending out new people into the mission field, then they'll have them come up on stage and do a special service just for them. But to know who a true missionary is, we just have to look at who's being a missionary where they are. God's plan is for us to witness to those around us. In our own backyard. Yeah, He calls people to go to special places and do special things. But we can look in the Bible and see that the only time that He does that is when no one in that place will answer the call. Where was Paul from? He was a Roman. Where was one of the biggest places he spent a lot of time? In Rome. Yes, he traveled around. Yes, he opened churches and started new missions. But he preached at home. One thing we can learn from these shepherds is that we are here. We are in Cordova and Jasper for a reason. God has called us to those places. And if we can't be a missionary here, why would we hope to be one anywhere else? Another thing we can learn from the shepherds was that they were hasty. And we need to be just the same way. Let us now go. We don't have to have special plans. We don't have to have special services. We don't have to have any of these things that a lot of times we wait for. We don't even need to have a revival. All we need is for God to be with us. For us to just go and do something. A lot of times we pass through life, we pass through our Christian walk without talking to many people until those special services come up. We're coming up on Christmas. Tons of people are going to be invited to church because it's Christmas. But what about in March? What about in June? Why aren't we inviting people then? Why aren't we doing what we need to do then? No, it's not a special time in the world's eyes. But if God is coming, if He is meeting with you, every time is special. Every service is special. And if we come to church, if we come with our hearts open and ready for His Word, if we come ready to learn something new, it's special. It is a special occasion. It wouldn't be one of the 10 Commandments to remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy if it wasn't special. But it's because every week we do it. Every week it's the same thing. We wake up, we get ready, we go to church, we get home, we make sure that the roast hasn't burned. And instead of keeping it special, instead of remembering it and keeping it holy, we make it routine and ordinary. Just another day. Just another ritual. That's why we don't invite people through the year. That's why it takes Christmas or Thanksgiving or New Year's or Easter for people to finally darken a church door, because they haven't seen how special it is through the rest of the year. They haven't seen that. And yes, Christmas time is a very special time. And Easter is a very special time. But you cannot understand Christmas. You cannot understand Easter unless you understand March and June and October. You can't understand it. What does it matter if a child came, if the Son of God came, if you don't know who God is? What does it matter if Jesus died on a cross for your sins, if you don't have a relationship with Him? What does it matter? Why remember these days if we're not going to take it seriously? If we're not going to celebrate it all through the year? Be humble. Be handy. And be hasty. Don't wait around. Don't put it behind you. Don't put it off till another day. Today is the day that the Lord has made. Today is the moment that He wants to speak to you or to someone else. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Today. Are we doing it? Are we keeping God's day special and holy? Are we handy? Are we allowing God to use us wherever we are, no matter what's going on around us? A way to answer those questions is easy. First, are we taking church seriously? Has it become a routine? Do we show up and do our thing and leave? Or do we prepare for church? Spend time in prayer for it. Think and meditate over what we've learned. Or is it just a come and go thing? Are we being handy? Questions to answer that are, when's the last time you witnessed to someone? Told them about God? When's the last time you invited someone around you to church? Are you being used in your community where you live? And are we being humble? Are we being open and receptive to God's Word? Are we ready to learn something new each and every day? Or do we already think we know the answers and we don't need to hear somebody stand up front and tell us this? Ask yourselves those questions. And then you'll know where your life's headed.